Well, hello, good friends. It is between two Sundays where Mark and I sort of come and hang out and talk stuff, and you listen to it and tell us what you think. Hi, Mark.
How are you, Mark? Good to see you.
I'm good. I'm good, thank you. Yeah, good to see me. This is 1/5 of the way through. No, yeah, no, 1/5 of the way through November now. Not too
Yes,
bad.
yes,
Not
that's
too
right.
bad. And
Yeah.
now that I say that, I wasn't going to do this, but now that I say that, I'll put my donation link so you can support Men's Health if you want to. No compulsion. Anybody, not you, Mark, but anybody listening, all, three of them. If you want to support
Very
Men's
good.
Health, you can do that, or support someone else who's doing Movember. But yeah, support it because it's the worst thing in the world to walk around looking like this. Trust me. Like you were saying, 70s Australian cricketers.
Yeah, yeah.
That's
Great look.
although it's
A
not
little
quite
out of
there.
date, but a great look.
Well, it looks bald, but it's just grey bits.
Yeah.
I'm
Yeah,
not
that's
sure
right.
what to think. Anyway, Between Two Sundays is what we're doing. Between Two Sundays is the show where we sit down and we talk about the readings that we've lived out on, or as we're living them out from the Sunday just gone, and we talk about the readings to come for the Sunday coming up. Last Sunday was the 23rd Sunday after Pentecost. We had Joshua 3, we had Psalm 107, we had 1 Thessalonians 2, and we had Matthew 23. Mark, what has stuck for you from that?
Yeah, I found myself in a conversation with a colleague yesterday around the Matthew 23 passage.
Yep.
You only have one teacher, one father, one instructor. And I found myself, there's something in me that really relates to this passage, actually. I certainly have people who are significant in my life and influential. But there is this deep sense that no one takes charge of my conscience,
Right.
except God. No one has the right into that space, and as a result, it feels like I have a responsibility to make my decisions, believe the things that I believe. And I liked I sat a little bit with the juxtaposition here of having no leader and this final comment around humility. All who exalt themselves will be humbled, and all who humble themselves will be exalted. So whatever this sense of having no leader looks like, it doesn't look like arrogance. It actually has to put us in a space of humility before one another and before God. So this clearly doesn't translate into I don't have to listen. I don't have to be a part of this conversation. You've got nothing to contribute to my world. Actually, quite the opposite is the case. There's this call for humility before God, our master, but there's also, I think, this call for humility before one another. It's sort of all of those things kind of come together to produce this beautiful space of learning and openness to each other without it becoming authoritarian. The only space for authority here or authoritarianism here is with God. And that means we become deep listeners to the heart of God. We become truly open to what God is communicating to us.
Yeah.
And we become people who are constantly molded as well. If you've got one teacher, one father, one instructor, then we are always being molded by Christ.
Right.
And I think this is a great space for us to learn to occupy, this humility before God and before others, and this sense that I don't give my conscience over to another. but I sit in this space of I am learning before God, and maybe God will speak to me through others, maybe even significant others who play the role of, you know, one who's gone a little bit further down the track than I am.
Right.
But I did find myself wondering about this. You know, to what degree is this a dangerous space that causes us not to listen to one another? But then I noticed, of course, the humility at the end here, and I think there's something really balancing about this idea. It did come hot on the heels of our 1 Thessalonians reading as well, of course, which insists that Paul behaved like a father. So there's kind of this juxtaposition or balance to try and find between these two passages.
Yeah, it's interesting. As you were talking, I was thinking about my Benedictine community and Benedictine communities in general, where we take a vow of obedience. But that vow of obedience isn't just to our abbot, it's, well, to God and the abbot, but it's also to each other. And so there's this sense of, and stability as well. Stability is also to each other. So there is this sense of great humility. And in fact, probably the most famous chapter in the Rule of St. Benedict is the chapter that's on humility. It's probably the most thorough chapter as well. It was a big deal to what it means to be a Benedictine monk and to enter into Benedictine spirituality, to take this posture of obedience and stability, which is essentially to combine is humility, to listen to each other and to be in a space where you look out for one another. So I resonate very strongly with what you're saying there. I found myself still in the Hebrew scriptures in the Joshua passage. But what stood out, and I don't think we discussed this last week. Isn't it funny how more and more and more comes out from the text as you keep reflecting on it? But in Joshua 3:10, Joshua says, by this you will know that among you is the living God, who without fail will drive out the Canaanites, Hittites, Hivites, Perizzites, Girgashites, Amorites, Jebusites, and Benjamites. And then says in verse 11, there's a colon after that. So this is how you'll know. The ark of the covenant of the Lord of all the earth is going to pass before you into the Jordan. Now, what's interesting about that, as I reflected on that, was one of the questions that I'm consistently asked and probably consistently ask myself, even as somebody who has been around the things of God for 30 plus years, is where is God? Where is God in this? Where can I see God? And I reflected on these two verses and thought, I wonder if, I wonder where my ark is. The Ark of the Covenant didn't just pass before them and go into the Jordan. It was there present in the center of the camp every time Israel stopped. It was there among them all the time. So there was this sense of God being there with them. And I wondered about, where are the arks in our lives? What arks do we have that remind us that the presence of God is here, that we are there, that God is among us and will be present for us in those moments? It's a bit of a rhetorical question and one to contemplate further for all of us. And I don't think there's going to be any one answer for that. I think there's going to be a few arcs that are around our lives. But I just love that idea of keeping before you things. And I'm standing at my desk at the moment, and I know it frustrates some people because I actually like things really neat and really clear. I'm a bit of a very simplistic minimalist in one sense, but in another sense, you can even see over my shoulder, I have all these little things sitting on the shelf. Here's a rhinoceros, for goodness sake, which, by the way, is called Ernie. And you'll like this. Stephen Bowers has one as well. And
right.
This used to sit on my desk, not this one, but one exactly the same as this used to sit on my desk when I was at Bergman Anglican School. And I gave it to the headmaster, Stephen Bowers, when I left, and he named it Ernie. And I've got it for other reasons, because it reminds me of what I can be like in terms of being a rhino. But this sits up here and reminds me to pray for Stephen and for the school, which now Stephen's not the leader of. But I've got all these little things here, and these are all kind of like little arcs. There's a little cross here, and there's a singing bowl here, and I have a little priest teddy bear here, and there's even a velociraptor, which was given to me by 1 year my chapel captains at All Saints Anglican School. But anyway, the point is that I kind of do have all these little arcs sitting around that remind me of things, and many of them point directly to moments with God. My favorite icon here in the corner, someone gave me, this is holy water, incense, oil, and soil from the Holy Land. Just weird little stuff that makes me remember where God is and who God is, and even individual people. So I don't know, where are your arcs, I guess, is the question that's worth asking. And how can you maintain those arcs before your eyes all the time, as the Israelites did? Speaking of Israelites, we're going to continue with Joshua this week. It is the 24th Sunday after Pentecost. We've only got 2 more Sundays to go, and then this liturgical year's finished, and we're backing it up into year B for the last round. Started in year C. But anyway, this week, 24th Sunday after Pentecost, we've got Joshua chapter 4, verses 1 to 3a, and then 14 to 25, Psalm 78, verses 1 to 7, 1 Thessalonians 4, verses 13 to 18, and Matthew 25, verses 1 to 13. Of course, you can find those passages in any Revised Common Lectionary. We grab ours at lectionary.library.vanderbilt.edu, who don't pay us to tell you that, but you can find really cool stuff there, like slides and artwork and prayers and so on, if you want to look for things to either reflect on as you reflect on the passages, or if you're a minister or priest or pastor, want to use some of those in your service when you preach from these passages in the Sunday to come. Shall we just work our way through as normal? Well, we don't. That's not always as normal, but want to start in Joshua?
Yeah.
Cool. We've gone from the start to the end.
The first thing to point out with the Joshua reading is that we've gone from Joshua chapter 3 to Joshua chapter 24.
Yeah.
And of course, there's a whole lot of, as we said last week, and I'm kind of glad we said it last week. I didn't realize this jump existed when I said it last week. But we talked a little bit about the violence in the book of Joshua last week, even though it wasn't in that Joshua 3 reading itself. We knew this was where this was leading. And so just to note that, look, on some level, someone has said, are these texts appropriate for public reading? Which is disturbing on a level and very, very wise on another level.
The expurgated version, the one without the cannon or the violence.
These are the kind of texts that if you were to read publicly, you would need to have an explanation up your sleeve, because it does not sound like the God of the Gospels. And it is on many levels quite a disturbing text. Having said that, the community I'm in at the moment preached through this a number of years ago through the book of Joshua, and there was a whole lot for us to discover about the descriptions of faith in this little book. So I'm not for a moment suggesting that this is something we shouldn't be interacting with. But what really struck me about this reading today is the repetition of the term serve, and then the fact that there is no choice whether to serve. The only choice offered here is whom to serve. So there's something in us, this passage is saying, there is something in us that seeks something or someone to serve. Or to put it in more religious language, there is something in us that seeks someone or something to worship. And the question here is just not, will you be a person of service? It's only about the direction. And obviously, Joshua very famously says that he will choose, throws the invitation out, choose this day whom you will serve. But for me and my household, we will serve the Lord. And of course, that just continues right throughout this passage, this choice of who you will serve. Remember, giving his 10 commandments, 10 words, however many there are, giving these instructions on how to live in freedom. And right at the top of that list is worshipping God and no one else. Right at the top of the list is an act of service to the one who created all things. So Joshua, the story of Joshua has moved into the promised land. There's been all this violence and all this war. Very disturbing text, as we've seen. And yet here we see the same echo that we've seen back in those 10 words, and that is the protecting of freedom. And right at the top of it is a decision as to who or what you will serve, not a question of whether we will be, whether our existence will serve another. That's not the question here at all. The question is, what are you going to serve? What are you going to worship? And I think that's probably one of the reasons this text has stood out to people in Joshua. This is not an unknown text. This is not one that our listeners are likely never to have come across before. Yet there would be many texts in the book of Joshua that would fall into that category. But here, this call to consider who you will be faithful to and to choose God is sort of, it's a great call to faith, to trust, and the language here is service. It's giving ourselves over to this one. And it's all linked with a preservation of freedom, not a reducing of it.
Yeah. The thing that's really struck me from this passage is that not one iota of it is individualistic. It's all plural.
Yes.
And so this is choose for yourselves. This is we will serve, we will do this, we will do that. You all is basically the yourselves. It's not talking about individuals. It's talking about a corporate identity. Now, what's important about that is even standing here on the edge of their promised land, on the other side of their promised land, we're at the end. Even then, the idea that they would have 100% consensus and 100% conformity to this ideal, this is just ludicrous to suggest that. At the least tens of thousands, if not, as some people like to believe, maybe close to 1 million, but I don't know if that's really possible. But, at least tens of thousands of people, there's got to be a few at least, who've got no interest in this, or are going to hold on to other gods or not do what they said. So it's interesting in this that the call goes out. Joshua must know that's got to be the case. And yet it's a corporate response. No one points the finger at an individual, either one way in terms of yes, we will, or another way it is in terms of no, I won't, or I won't. It's more a case of we will. And so this says to me that the way that we walk with God has got to go beyond an individualistic notion. And it's also got to go beyond just plain morality. This is more than morality. And following God and following Jesus particularly, if you want to simmer it down to morality, I think you've really boiled the baby out with the bathwater, for a mix of metaphors. You've really got rid of the good stuff, because it's not just about, if it's all about simple morality, well, the question is based on what? Because the morality that we see in the Bible would no way, shape, or form, in many instances, even come close to even what a conservative person might call a morality for today. So we need to understand this as something beyond morality. This is about a corporate identity and about all of us walking together towards an ideal under a banner which is God. And we need to walk that way. It's not about conforming to a particular framework for that, though. This is about working together to ensure that everybody has what they need and needs what they have. This is about a community that's come into this place, and now they've really got an option. They can feed themselves individually now, and look after number one, because it's what most people think of as number one, or they can be the type of people that look out across the whole of not just their tribe, but beyond their tribe, and say, how can we ensure that this ideal, that this God who we heard call us out of Egypt is as sought, the God of, remember, it's Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, not just the God of Moses. This is the God of Abraham, the one who said, you will be blessed and you will be a blessing. And so really within this call, there's this deeper sense of coming into some sort of corporate identity together. And I don't think we should miss that in what Joshua is calling the people to here. And we see this too when we move into the psalm, which resonates very much what the people were saying here, that these are a people who would incline their ear to the teachings of God, will allow God's sayings to come out of them, which really sort of says that this presence of God resides within them as a community and as individuals as well, and that they share this together. So there is this sense in the psalm too of the same ideal there. And I think, individualistic modern day Christianity could learn a great deal from recapturing what it means to be a people of God, not a person of God.
Yes. And this is not only in the psalm here, it's not only, and indeed in Joshua as well, in our Joshua passage, this is not only we, the community of people around us now, there is this sense of handing on from one generation to the other as well.
Yes.
So the mention of children sits both here in our Joshua passage, but also in our psalm. And, there is this sense of investment in them. The only link to the future is actually through investing in them. And of course, there's this this almost painful, ever-repeated reminder in the Psalms not to forget.
Yeah.
Which Joshua was going out of his way to say, look, don't make this lightly. There's a strong possibility here that you'll regret this decision at some stage. There's a strong possibility that you will forget, but we're going to be a people who remind ourselves constantly of the things that have happened throughout this particular campaign, and the things God has done for them.
Yeah, I think the fourth verse here was the one that struck me. We will not hide them, the wonders, and so on that God has done. We will not hide them from our children. And I often wonder about the way we hide who God truly is from not just other generations, but other people, because our own actions get in the way. And the importance of letting that residence that God takes up within us, both as a community and as individuals, that residence that God takes up inside of us, to allow that to be the thing that is not hidden, that has a place to work itself out. And I think the place that's hardest for that to happen is corporately. It's very
Yes.
easy to, allow your own children at home or people in your own household to hear and see of the wonders that God has done. But how do we as a community act that out together? And again, this is not about going out and preaching on street corners and yelling at people as they walk past. This is about working together, even with those who might see themselves as outside this tribe. Ours would be the Christian faith, I suppose, but who might be members of other tribes or of no tribe at all. But because we all share this same space together, walking through this together, if we believe what the scriptures say about the rain falling on the just and the unjust and God being there for and among all people and so on, we have to believe that God is the banner over all of that. And so we need to learn to walk in companionship with other people, some of whom we might even disagree with, in order to allow that true sense of what God is and what God's about to not be hidden from the generations that are around us. And how have we messed that up? So much so in the past, and in some ways set up conflicts that have lasted generation for generation, because that's what we exposed. We exposed the conflicts and not the good things of what God has done among us. So, it's looking for those opportunities and being able to say to our children, look at where God is among us, because even though we might think different, talk different, come from different cultures, backgrounds, even religions, we still stand together under this banner of God, and we still share who we are with the community that is around us, and seek to see love exposed as the thing that each generation can see and hear.
Yeah, I wonder if that's a really helpful reflection. That this not hiding is probably a lot more than telling the next generation all the things we have. I certainly with my own children, I find myself wanting to behave in ways that I hope they will one day notice. Whether they do now, I'm not trying to force my own habits on any of them or anything like that. But there is this sense that, gee, I hope one day they learn from my journey rather than just from the things I told.
Yeah, absolutely.
I hope that that's a deeper sense of learning, that's a deeper sense of not hiding the truths of God, rather than a shallower or there is something beyond articulation that people, especially my family, especially my children, would see me at least grappling with this extraordinary call to such a broad love that Jesus asks of us.
Yeah. I'm going to say I'm a little bit disappointed, maybe that's not the word, that the Thessalonians passage appears in the same week as the Joshua passage and the Matthew passage that we'll get to in just a moment. And the reason why is because the Thessalonians passage is pretty much about it's an understanding from Paul's perspective of what may happen to us at death, and what may happen to us in the sense that the things come to an end for people. And we'll get to the Matthew passage in a minute and why that could cause some frustration there. But certainly in the context of the Joshua passage, which we've already discussed, this idea unfortunately comes about that this passage is about, this is what's waiting for those people who do serve God and do reject the other gods, and it's only available for them. Rather, I think the interesting line in this whole passage of 1 Thessalonians 4:13-18 is verse 18, which is therefore encourage one another with these words. And of course, Paul is talking about what some people I think misinterpret as some sort of rapture, and I think there's a lot more figurative than literal language in here that we're seeing from Paul. But at the same time, he is talking about this hope that somehow, even when we physically die, we are still connected, not just to God, but to each other. And I suppose I see that in this light because, for the last 6 months, I've worked in an aged care facility as a chaplain, and I've held hands with people who have died, and I've sat with people who were friends with that person, very close to them, basically lived with them in the same facility, sometimes for a long time. And this is a people who know that they're going to die. This is pretty much why they've come to this facility. It's not a retirement village. It's so that they can be cared for in their old age, because it's just unsafe for their families or their spouses or whatever to do so in their home. And so they come to us so they can have 24-hour focused, concerted care from nurses and clinical staff, so they can have their day-to-day needs taken care of by support staff, so they can be partially cared for every day for people like myself, and so that they can be safe and protected and live their last years to the full as they can. And that's really the focus. Shouldn't be thought of as morbid. We work hard to ensure that our residents live the fullest life that they have possible. And we have, a centenarian among us, and she is such a vibrant woman. So, she's, Barbara's still living a full and wonderful life. This passage here is full of hope, because what it's telling us is that physical death isn't necessarily the end of things, that there is a sense in which we continue. And we can conjecture all we like about what that definitely looks like, but the fact is, no one who's been there has come back to tell us what it's like. There are people who think they may have, and I don't want to take their testimonies away from them. That's what they believe. But when there's conflicts in those testimonies, you have to ask the question, well, which one might be true? Could be all of the above, both and. What I'd like to think, though, if we're going to focus on anything, is we focus on the fact that, quite simply, the physical death is not the end of life. And that's really what I think Paul is trying to get people of Thessalonica to understand here. That just when someone dies, it's not the end. And we shouldn't take it as being the end, either if we're the one approaching death, but also even if we're the one who is stood there with someone who has died. That person whose body might still be there, we haven't been separated from them. And so this is a really important passage for those occasions that should, I think, help us to comprehend more fully and this beautiful way of life that we are a part of. And that while we cannot be certain exactly what it looks like, that in some way we live on, and take some courage and hope in that.
I want to put a plug in here for Paul is not saying we do not grieve.
Right.
He's saying we do not grieve as those without hope.
Right.
I do think there is a look, there's an extreme understanding of faith that says even this is a happy occasion, and there's something terribly destructive about us not embracing loss. And I don't believe Paul is doing this here, but I think he's saying, yes, there is a healthy grief, and there is an unhealthy grief that, this is the absolute end and there is nothing more. And this is supposed to be, by the time we get to the end of this passage, a space of encouragement So this story, whether it be parabolic or literal, either way, the outcome for Paul in his mind is that this will be a source of encouragement.
Yes.
And you know, you're exactly right in what you're saying there. I love this second last sentence here, or phrase. So we will be with the Lord forever. So often we've heard this as, I will be with the Lord forever.
Right.
But straight back to all the corporate stuff you were observing in Joshua, and indeed in the Psalm, here in 1 Thessalonians, we have exactly the same vision. It's not just we're going through life together, but we're going through life and into eternity together.
Right.
So you know, we've got to understand this as more than individualistic if we're to get our heads around the level of encouragement that Paul is trying to convey to us. And it is not, I will be with the Lord forever. It is, we will be with the Lord forever. And that's the source of encouragement. That's the vision. To cut that short would be a real shame. To individualize that would be to inflict something on Paul's thinking that perhaps we don't intentionally do, but we in individualizing our faith, we see a very different vision here. And heaven is a place where others are.
Yes.
Or whatever life looks like beyond here. This is the little gem that Paul is hoping will encourage us to grieve, but not grieve in despair. And that is that we will be with Christ. So
right.
We've got this community. I mean, you can find the same in Revelation. By the time you get to the end of Revelation, you've got a picture of a city where, you know, the pearly gates are open all the time and it's always day and people are coming and coming and coming. This beautiful vision of a together place of peace.
Yeah. Let's remember too that we will be with the Lord forever. That word forever doesn't mean from now forward. It means from now backward as well.
Yeah.
We will be with the Lord forever. In other words, we've never been separated from God and we will never be separated from God. And therein lies the hope. The other thing that's really interesting that I thought of while you were speaking there as well is, you know, I know our Catholic brothers and sisters get maligned quite a lot for being mistakenly told that they pray to Mary and other saints. First thing, they don't pray to Mary and other saints. They ask Mary and other saints to pray for them. Secondly, let's remember, and I think I've talked about this before on this program, let's remember that if we believe this passage, if we believe what we see in Revelation, if we believe what we see in Hebrews chapter 12, then we need to believe that there is other people around us cheering us on, praying for us, and that to interact with them may not be completely something. I know in the past people have said that's wrong. It's, you know, it's crass. It's even satanic and occultish. I don't necessarily see that. I see here in Scripture that they're praying for us. They're talking, you know, they're cheering us on, inspiring us, even giving us wisdom to ask Patrick or Mary or someone else to pray for us, just like I ask you to pray for me. If we truly believe that all we've done, if we're forever with the Lord and I'm with the Lord and you're with the Lord and yet someone else who's died is also with the Lord, then maybe there's something in that us white middle-class Protestant boys have forgotten and need to recapture somehow. I know that might be something of conjecture for some people, but it's probably worth thinking about and contemplating, and maybe even asking some of our Catholic brothers and sisters what it's about. Remembering, of course, that I was told by a Catholic leader who's now a bishop, was the abbot of a monastic community, still is a member of that community, but is now a bishop down in New South Wales, who said that unfortunately there are a lot of Catholic people who misunderstand what they do as well. But certainly within Catholic theology, they do not pray to anyone else but God, but they will certainly ask other people to pray for them. The other reason why I think that passage is unfortunate when you mix it with the gospel is you can easily read this Matthew 25 passage as being about dying and going to heaven. And that mistake, I think, comes also from the way Jesus introduces it and to most people's misunderstanding of what this means. Then the kingdom of heaven will be like this. Remembering that when Jesus talks about the kingdom of heaven, which is interchangeable with the kingdom of God, we're talking about a way of doing and being in the world. And Jesus is saying, what will that look like, or what will that entail, and how will that be? So this is not talking about, 5 bridesmaids being ready for Jesus when he comes back and it's all over. This is actually talking about something very, very different. This is talking about what it will look like when the kingdom is coming. And so you've got in this story 5 foolish bridesmaids and 5 wise ones. The foolish ones go out to meet the bridegroom, but they forget to take extra oil with them in their lamps, whereas the other ones take extra oil. And so they're out there, and the 5 bridesmaids whose oil goes out of their lamps don't have any oil to fill them up and keep them burning. And so they ask the other ones, can you give us some oil? To which the 5 wise ones reply, no, there will not be enough for you and for us. You'd better go to the dealers and buy some for yourselves. Now, what's really interesting about this passage is this. You can read this mistakenly as being, we're talking about oil, we're talking about anointing, we're talking about spirit. And you could say, well, why are they saying there's not enough? I don't know if that's probably the best way to look at the translating there, but certainly what they're saying is that there has been this oil, this spirit, this revelation that's come, but we can't give you ours because you need to go and get your own. That you need to have your own experience of God. That you need to, we can share with you some of our light, but we can't share with you any of the oil because it's not ours to give. That you need to experience that for yourself and discover that for yourself. And that's part of this journey that we're in. And I think people get tripped up where at the end, the bridesmaids come in and to the banquet, and the Lord of the banquet says to them, truly, I tell you, I do not know you. What's interesting about that is that the wedding banquet door is shut, but they can still get into the place where the banquet's happening. Why can't they see the banquet? Well, they probably can't see the banquet because they can't comprehend what that will be like to have that intimate feast with this Lord. So I don't think this is a passage that's shutting people out and saying these ones will be left and these ones will go and yeah. I think what this passage is about is understanding that our walk with God is going to happen. You'll notice that it's still corporate. There's still 5 and 5. It's not 1 and 1. So it's going to happen corporately, but there's this sense of journeying towards it in a way that brings us into this understanding and working together to find our way there. But it can't be something that I give you. I can't give you something that's going to help you see. You're going to have to see for yourself. And having been around these things for 30 odd years, as you have, you'll know full well too, Mark, that I can't make someone see what it is that I see. Yet 5 years later, they can come to me and they can say, wow, I had this experience and yada, 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 blah, blah, blah. And it's happened for them, but it's had to happen for them themselves. If you want another practical example of this from the scriptures, think of Thomas. When Thomas says, unless I myself put my finger in his nail, where the nails were, and my hand in his side, I won't believe. This is not Thomas being doubtful. This is Thomas saying, I need to own this for myself. I need to experience this for myself so I can believe it in the same way that you do. And I really think that this parable focuses on that. And that's the better lens, I think, to understand what Jesus is saying here.
There are moments in this passage that are truly quite difficult. I think this this lack of sharing. I think often it stands out as a parable. I love your reflection that you've had on that, by the way, and certainly agree with it. But you can see how people do get tripped up on this in this parable. This lack of sharing seems to go against everything of the Jesus in Matthew, everything that he's just sharing with the disciples. So I think your reflection there is really helpful. I think we really do read this as a permanent closing on these virgins who have gone off to get more oil. And I do have questions about whether that's necessary, actually. Lord, open to us. Truly, I tell you, I do not know you. I'm not sure that implies as strongly as so many have often said that they can't get to know this one. That this is the absolute end. I do find myself, as I do with a lot of parables nowadays, looking at where the narrator feels this parable is going. So the parables are often, I think they often can be legitimately interpreted in a number of directions. But I find myself asking, okay, how has the narrator interpreted this parable? And this is a classic on this. So we get to the end, and it looks like the narrator is saying, keep awake, therefore, for you know neither the day nor the hour. So this is actually a call to humility. It's a call to this readiness, and however we interpret the parable, I think we need to hold on to where Matthew thinks it's going. And by the end of this, we really have this call to be a people who are living in the hope that the bridegroom is returning. So we're allowing that reality to impact the way we live now. I do think we need to be careful with all of this, but there's something in me that wants to at least start interpreting a parable like this, which does have, some elements that you could take in a number of different directions. But what does it look like for us, at least first, to ask around the parable, what does Matthew think it's asking of us? And really, he's saying, I want you to be people who are ready. And yes, this is probably something that can't be shared in the sense of giving it away, but can only be discovered and held and nurtured by us rather than someone else. So I wonder if, I don't know, is there a limiting on all we've said around community in these other passages in this one? Not to dismiss those things, but to just to say maybe it's not an absolute.
Let me spin it. While you're talking, I've got a totally different take on this parable now.
Yep.
It's a parable. There are a multitude of ways that you can understand it. What if the way that we've read it is predominantly we read it as the wise bridesmaids had the oil for the lamps, the foolish ones didn't, and they missed out. And so we tend to think of the onus being on the foolish ones for being foolish. If the corporate thing is to be taken in the way that we've talked about it so far today, maybe we've focused on the wrong end. Maybe what this passage is actually about is it's about some wise bridesmaids who had enough oil for their lamps, who were going to stay awake, who made it into the banquet, but didn't keep those around them awake with them, didn't share their oil with them, and totally ignored them once they were inside the banquet. Maybe this is a parable about how to truly live corporately and how the wise bridesmaids missed the opportunity because they didn't live with a corporate mindset. The 5 foolish bridesmaids, they asked, they reached out, they sought advice, they sought support. They were trying to live corporately, but the wise ones lost it. And as I'm talking to you, I'm reminded that quite often the wise, the rich, the wealthy, the powerful, they're the ones in Jesus' parables that are the examples. They're the ones that quite often the parables are pointing to as the ones who have missed it. Maybe in this parable, the wise ones are the ones who've missed it. And this is a parable about how to truly live in a corporate mindset and to look out for one another to ensure that we can all attend the banquet together.
I can see how you got there.
Hey!
That's very interesting. That's very different to the way most of us, I suspect, would have interpreted it.
You heard my first interpretation.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, and this only dropped into my head while you were talking. I'm going, hang on a second.
Of course.
So much so,
Yeah.
I'm going to reflect on this a bit longer. I'm going to do a podcast on the Monk in Docs podcast about this, because I think there's something very powerful if we read it in that way. That's really interesting. Yeah. Again, folks, this is a parable, and we can understand this in so many different ways and turn the gem and see something new and beautiful every time.
It is designed to be. It is designed to be played with.
Absolutely.
It's designed to set our imaginations free rather than restrict them.
Well, there you are, my friend. We come to the end. We have been reflecting on the readings for the 24th Sunday after Pentecost, proper 27, week 32, for those of you who go by weeks. We've been looking at Joshua 24, verses 1 to 3a and 14 to 25, Psalm 78, verses 1 to 7, 1 Thessalonians 4, 13 to 18, and Matthew 25, verses 1 to 13. We, as always, would love to hear what you think about these passages. Please drop us a line. You can do so at between2sundays@gmail.com. That's the number 2. So you can send us an email there, or you can send us you can drop Mark a line at his website, which is barefootfollower.life. You can drop me a DM or comment on some of my posts at Instagram, which is @monkindocs, or drop a comment if you're listening to us on Spotify. I know there's a place you can comment or respond to the reflection question, which is simply how did you understand these readings? Or drop us a note in YouTube down below if you're watching us there. Or if you're listening to us and you want to get a comment to us, go over to YouTube and don't listen to it again, just drop a comment in and do that there. But we'd love to hear from you as we rub shoulders together and hone each other like iron sharpens iron. Yeah. Thanks, my man.
Great to chat again.
Always. And until next week, folks, we'll pray you have a good week. And only a couple of weeks left of Year B. So we'll look forward to catching you. Year A. So we'll look forward to catching you next week on Between Two Sundays. Cheers and bye for now.
See you then.